Trust from BBC Radio Berkshire.
Get the latest travel you trust online.
bbc.co.uk/Berkshire.
BBC Radio Berkshire.
Tuesday morning, BBC Radio Berkshire with Andrew Peach. Mary Edwards is Chief Executive of the Hampshire Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust, and she's here in the hot seat this morning. We've dealt with Thames Water. It's Mary's turn next. Hello, Mary.
Good morning, Andrew.
Good to have you with us. Tell me about this merger, because in January, the hospital that our listeners were using, Basingstoke, has merged with other hospitals in Hampshire.
That's right. On January the 9th, we went live as a single organisation with 3 hospitals. That's the one in Basingstoke, the Royal Hampshire County in Winchester, and the Andover War Memorial Hospital.
This has got to be a money-saving thing.
There was money to be saved, and that's primarily from the back office support functions, things like the finance department and the HR department. But the real driver for it was to make sure we had enough population so that we could maintain our very acute services, things like heart attacks, strokes and so on.
Is this a bit of a takeover on your part? Are you in charge of all of it now?
Yes, it is. Basingstoke, as a foundation trust, did take over the Royal Hampshire County and incorporated it.
Right, so a small reduction in jobs, 70 jobs.
Yes.
Are going across the whole thing. Will you be specialising some services in some locations, or will everything carry on being available in all the hospitals?
We've already, for some years, specialised in locations to some extent. So, for example, you would only go to Basingstoke if you were having a heart attack and needed something called a primary angioplasty, which is where they put a stent in your heart. And similarly, if you needed a clot-busting drug, thrombolysis for strokes, you would go to Winchester at the moment. What we would like to do over time is to develop a specialist centre where all of those services are co-located in the middle of our patch.
Whereabouts would that be? Somewhere south of Basingstoke?
Yeah, we haven't got a location at the moment, but what would be really important is that it is accessible by road and helicopter, because I'm talking about patients when they're at their sickest and they need those doctors very quickly.
The golden hour and all of that.
Absolutely.
Are you keeping all these sites open? I mean, we're most concerned about the North Hampshire Hospital in Basingstoke, which is the biggest of them, but are you keeping all these hospitals open?
Yes, our goal is to keep all of them open, because a lot of our services need to be close to our patients.
That's an interesting word to use, goal. I mean, I suppose your colleagues over in East Berkshire would say, well, our goal is to keep Heatherwood Hospital open, but they won't, ultimately.
Yeah, no, I understand, and you've picked me up on the language there, but truly we do want to maintain our local bases. In fact, we want to develop more local bases, so we want to be on, if you like, on the street corner in a lot of the smaller towns.
There's a lot of news stories around about money in the NHS being squeezed, and yet you'll hear the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary saying, no, the money going into the NHS is being increased. Are both things true?
Yeah, they are actually, because if you look at the data at a national level, I think the phrase the finance people use is flat cash. So basically the NHS has had its income protected.
And increased?
Increased to a certain extent, because it is based on the number of people in a location. It's a formulaic thing. But the problem we've got is that we want to do ever more things with that same amount of money, so it has to go further.
Right. So the deal is that there is literally a bit more money for the NHS. That is true.
Yeah.
But because of inflation within healthcare and an ageing population and more scientific advances, there are more and more things you're trying to get out of that same money.
That's absolutely spot on,
Which
Andrew.
is why then we talk about, hundreds, thousands of job losses and all kinds of changes within the NHS.
Yeah, it is. But also, like all businesses, we can get more efficient and also use technology for things that perhaps we might have used people for in the past.
So is there then scope for more than 70 job losses within the organisation that you're now running? Because other NHS trusts in our area are losing hundreds of posts, aren't they?
Yeah, I think what we've always prided ourselves on in Basingstoke and would like to continue with Hampshire Hospitals is making sure that we're not getting rid of people, not making individuals redundant, but making sure that we don't, if you like, over-recruit and then find we've got too many people and then have to back up. And what we did through the acquisition, for example, is hold quite a lot of vacancies, so that when we did the reshuffling, we weren't actually saying to individuals there aren't any jobs to be had.
Lots of talk at the moment of the government's plans to change how the NHS functions. and you'll see these posters with, I think there are trade union posters, I imagine anyway, everywhere, sort of saying, NHS workers don't want this to happen. Do you think it's a good idea?
I think the changes are primarily about organisations that aren't hospitals. So I think when I'm sat running a group of hospitals, the changes have slightly less impact.
No, I get
me.
that. It's about primary care trusts and, GP practice and all of that. But the thing is, Mary, you know more about it than most of us do. So your opinion will be interesting, because most of us are a bit bamboozled by the detail.
Yeah. I think I'm rather long in the tooth, which your listeners perhaps might not realise. I've been in the NHS for well over 30 years, and I think you get used to a constant cycle of reorganisation. And so I guess part of the frustration at the moment is yet another reorganisation.
Is it necessary?
I think you can always improve, and I think the one bit that I feel should be better is having GPs directly involved. They are the people who day to day look after our elderly and our individuals in the society with illnesses, so they do know what is needed. And I think having them talking with my hospital doctors, for example, about how services should be developed has to be better for patients.
Right, so that principle is a good one. Are there things about the changes that are being planned that concern you?
I think we would be concerned if GPs didn't have the personal capacity to spend time actually running organisations, because there's still an organisation to be run as a commissioning organisation, and it may not be best use of their time to turn into full-time managers, because we still want them using their really good clinical skills with patients. And I think that's the balance, getting some management support for those GPs to do those roles.
So when the government sort of talk about primary care trusts as though they're stocked with bureaucrats, you're thinking, well, maybe those people are doing useful things.
I certainly think some of them are, and as you can imagine, as a manager myself, I slightly bristle when I hear
most of them, maybe. Let's hope most of them are doing something useful.
Yeah, quite. So I think we underestimate what managers do in all sorts of businesses, not just health. I mean, I employ 5,000 people. That takes managing.
Is running a hospital trust basically an impossible task? Because if you look elsewhere around our area, we've rather carelessly lost most of our hospital chief executives in recent years. We've lost 2 at Wexham Park. We've lost, it looks like we've lost 1 at the Royal Berkshire, in as best we can tell. And to the outside world, you think, well, these jobs just must be impossible for any human being to carry off, and yet you're still there fighting on.
Yeah, I mean, I've been around quite a long time. I've been in Basingstoke since 1995. I think it's a bit like football managers, and I'm not an expert on football, but I've watched the Chelsea scenario recently, and it feels a bit similar, which is you do need to let people have long enough time in the job to learn the organisation, get the trust of the staff, so that they can then develop. And I think sometimes perhaps we're a little too keen to move people on before they've had the chance to do that. I mean, I've obviously had an awful long time to get to know people and do that.
How do you keep morale among your workforce high? Because it's a huge organisation, the NHS, and especially with it's always under scrutiny. There's talk of change at the moment. It would be very easy for people working in the NHS to feel pretty depressed about the whole thing, I suspect.
I think, again, it relates back to my previous answer in a way. If you're around a long time, the staff learn to trust you and talk to you. And I think if you walk around and talk to them a lot, you can do a lot as a leader yourself. But also you can imbue that into your next level of leaders and managers in the organisation, so that they also listen to their staff, talk to them, explain to them. So we did a lot of talking with the staff through the acquisition, because that created fear. And I think you have to be open with people, you have to be honest with them and say there will be job losses, we will try and keep it to a minimum, and we will involve the unions and negotiate our way through that. You
had some norovirus, winter vomiting problems around Christmas at Basingstoke. What's the deal with that now? How did that come about, and how was it sorted?
Yeah, norovirus is a community disease, really, and it comes seasonally. It's affected by the weather, or more like I should say its end is affected by the weather, and so it is a seasonal problem. And some patients can be very ill with it, therefore they come into hospital, and once they're in hospital it's quite difficult to then control its spread. And so what we tend to do is to isolate those patients to stop them infecting others whilst we're looking after them, and then try and reduce the spread. And we're getting better at it every year. So you may remember back.
So it's just unlucky, really, that you got this at Christmas.
I think so, and I think a few years ago we would have had it across the whole of the hospital. Now we're getting much better at controlling it and keeping it on small numbers of wards.
Have you changed anything about your sort of hygiene practices and all of that as a result of it?
Not specifically because of norovirus, but with the increased interest in infection and us all learning more, we're much better now at deep cleaning the wards frequently. There's also new technology with the steam gadgets to clean the wards. So all of that, hand washing, all the basic stuff is greatly improved.
OK. Let's talk about this idea of cancer care in the Basingstoke patch, because a lot of people are having to travel to Southampton for radiotherapy. It's clearly a long way. The move in the NHS, the movement is towards having this sort of thing provided more locally. What news on that? Yeah,
we are very keen to establish a cancer centre in the north of our patch, so in the north of Hampshire. And it is to provide radiotherapy to avoid patients having to travel to Southampton daily for 6 weeks, which is awful, but also to provide our current day case chemotherapy and also hopefully some complementary therapies, because all of that combined really does enhance the experience when people are really suffering through cancer treatment.
So you've got a few plans on the table in a cancer centre somewhere around Basingstoke and this emergency centre somewhere south of Basingstoke. At a time when funds are stretched, how soon might we actually see these things built?
Yeah, and we haven't got any firm timelines, but when I talk with the staff, I say we're looking at a sort of 4 to 5 year window for the specialist centre. The cancer centre, I think we would hope that we could move more quickly, and it is one of the reasons I'm so delighted that charities are helping us, because the more money we can get quickly, the sooner we can get the building up and running.
What's on your agenda today? What's in your diary today after talking to me?
In my diary today is to go back and do some walking around the wards, because I've actually not got many meetings in the diary. I'm talking to a candidate for a potential consultant post. I spend a lot of time making sure we get really good consultants. And then towards the end of the day, I've got an internal meeting with some of our managers.
We're talking earlier about job interviews and the sort of ridiculous questions that get asked at job interviews, like, what's your favourite dinosaur? What do you have on your bedside table at home? What do you ask when you're recruiting consultants? What do you ask them?
Yeah, when I'm talking to consultants, I either ask them to tell me what their next door neighbour thinks of them, and you get some fascinating responses from that. Or I ask them what the team they're working with in a different hospital thinks, and that's the more boring version. I quite like, what does your neighbour think?
What would your neighbour say? If your neighbour were here right now, what would he say?
Yeah.
Been out using your hose pipe in the bath, that kind of thing. It's really good to have you in the studio, Mary. Thanks ever so much.
My pleasure.
Good to have you with us. That's Mary Edwards, Chief Executive of the Hampshire Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust that runs the North Hampshire Hospital in Basingstoke, among others. It's 29 minutes past 9. BBC Radio Berkshire with Andrew Peach. Good morning.
BBC Radio Berkshire.